The house was supposed to be silent. You thought house sitting for your uncle and aunt would be fun. Stay up all night, watch TV, get paid for it. What you didn't expect were the sounds of the floorboards creaking only at night, the feeling of breathing on your neck when you watched TV, and most importantly, your uncle and aunt don't have kids. So who is that little boy walking back and forth in the hallway? Enjoy these allegedly true stories of creepy kids with the relaxing and creepy sounds of an empty house on a windy night. Don't forget, you can go to darknessprevails.org to send me your stories. I'm looking for creepy experiences from cops. 1. The Girl by Lilly. When I was around 5 years old, that was when I first saw her. I was walking down the attic steps, and right across the hallway was a girl of maybe 5 or 6 years old. I could see her so clearly, except her face, because for some reason her face was blurry to me. She had on a white cream dress and short curly black hair. Although I couldn't properly see her face, I could see her eyes, which were solid black. She looked at me in such a mysterious and eerie way. I felt like she was curious about me, because she would always follow me and still does. Even now, in the corner of my eye, I feel that I can see her, that small shape of a little girl. I feel like I've known her before. It's hard to explain. I would only ever see her fully when she was across the hall in my old bedroom. She always looked sad. There was this time when I got sent to bed for being bad, and my dad switched off my bedroom light and locked the door. The only light was my bedside table light and a bit of light coming from outside. In the corner of my room, I saw something. Again, I couldn't see a face, but I did see a dark and malevolent feeling shadow. I was scared because it looked like it was going to pounce on me, and I panicked. I screamed and screamed, but my dad would not open the door. All I can remember from that night was trying to get out, but eventually falling asleep. I don't know who the little girl is, but after that night, I realized that she's not there to be my friend. 2. Haunted Children by Isaiah. I was 7 years old. It was a school night, and before this, nothing out of the ordinary had ever happened in my house. It was 3 a.m., and I woke up for seemingly no reason. I turned over, scratching my head, then tried to fall back to sleep. That's when I noticed that my bedroom door was opened. My eyes grew wide, and I looked over to see a little girl in a red dress and a small boy with pajamas. At first, I thought it may have been my brother and sister, but then I realized that blotches of darkness were blotting their faces. Despite my room having a pretty bright nightlight, it didn't make sense. I nearly yelled out for my mother, but found myself so scared that I simply laid my head back down and pretended I was sleeping. After a few minutes of them standing there, the little girl walked down the hall to my sister's room, but the boy stood there before waving by and following the girl. After 20 minutes of not moving, I whispered to my brother until he woke up, and I said to him, "Shut the door." He did so, then went right back to bed, but I was unable to go to sleep that night. When the sun rose and my alarm went off, waking up my brother, I simply pretended to wake up too, pretended that I had been sleeping the entire night. Ever since that experience, I simply can't sleep with the lights on. If anything is there, I'd rather the lights be off, making me completely unaware of it. When I have the nightlight on, I feel like I'm being watched, and I can see figures moving out of the corner of my eye. My mom says it's just me watching too many scary movies, but none of these figures resemble anything I've seen in TV. It doesn't matter if I'm home or at my friend's house. It's always the same. Even when I'm walking on the curb, I avoid the dimmest streetlights, favoring either complete darkness or extremely bright areas. I'm not sure if you believe my story, but it's real, and it seems to be getting worse. I've seen them again recently, and this time, they took far longer to leave. 3. A Very Important Lesson by FearBunny. Sometimes the scariest things in the world are the people around us. People we don't bother to get to know, or people who seem relatively normal or harmless. Before I begin, I want to say that the story takes place in Canada. Let me start from the beginning. I was not a popular kid in elementary school. I was the only person of my race, and I had a sort of weird, quirky personality. I believe it was a mix of those two things that caused people to see me as an other, someone different, and let me tell you, these kids did not like different. I'm not the main character in the story, but I suppose I'm explaining this to you because I know what it's like to be severely bullied, mentally and physically, just for being different. Where I lived at the time in Canada, middle schools weren't a thing, meaning you went to the same elementary school in the same building, from your kindergarten years to your last year of 8th grade. This means that, unfortunately, I was bullied by the same people year after year for nearly a decade. But I wasn't the only one. There were these 4 boys who always hung out together. They were decent fellows, really, but were picked on just as much as I was for whatever reason, and we were more acquaintances or classmates than friends. There was one kid in the group named Ro, who seemed to get picked on more than his 3 other friends. He was a short boy, a little skinny, with big hazel doe eyes, wavy brown hair, and always wore gray jogging pants and printed t-shirts. I didn't get to know Ro quite well, but to me he was always more or less a quiet kid who liked video games and cartoons. He was never rude or mean to anybody, and mostly kept to himself and his few other friends. I remember how the other boys in the class, however, would go out of their ways to pick at every single flaw he had, or they would make up flaws if they couldn't find any. I often sympathized from afar, but being a victim of the same type of abuse, I didn't want to get involved. I know it wasn't very brave of me, but I was scared that if I said something, those truly evil boys would turn around and start harassing me, and I just wasn't strong enough to put up with that. Sadly, the teachers never got involved either, not when certain students who were disliked by everyone were being picked on. If I could meet them today, I would not hesitate to look them in the eye and tell them what terrible humans they are, to allow the things that happened to go on, and how much better they'd have done the world if they had chosen to flip burgers instead. It was a horribly toxic environment, and sometimes when you're in a position like that, you teeter upon a line where you can fall on either side of forgiveness and overcome your traumas, or you can plunge deep into chaos and disaster. By the end of elementary school, Ro always had this miserable look on his face, like he was just trudging along the path of life from one second to another, as if every moment of being alive was pain. Even the way he carried himself was different. His posture gradually morphed into a hunch. To give you an idea, it looked as if his shoulders were always tensed up against his ears, and he would face the ground instead of looking straight ahead, carefully and deliberately avoiding criticizing eyes. Soon, for me, it was finally time to leave that godforsaken elementary school and go into junior high. I was excited. High school for me was like a breath of fresh air, a steady dose of sanity that I hadn't had before. The students were far nicer at my high school. Other than the occasional sneer from a rare encounter with my dear old elementary school classmates, I was well liked, and even when people didn't know me, we treated each other with mutual respect. As for Roe, because of the sheer volume of students in the building, I barely ever saw him, but when I did, I noticed he had changed. His big hazel doe eyes were dulled to a half-deadened, heavy-lidded look, and he had developed a taste for lots of black gothic clothing, makeup, and accessories. His fashion choice was fine with me. I learned early on that people who judge others based on the way they look are just ignorant. No matter how a person chooses to present themselves, they're human beings too, who deserve the same kindness as anyone else. Roe was somehow still being badly bullied. Perhaps his decision to wear the things he wore made him stand out to the other rude kids. Or maybe it's just the idea that not all of your fellow high school students are going to be saints. But all this negativity was still happening to Roe, and I did not like it at all. I just felt that there was enough injustice that had already taken place. This new high school, where I was being empowered, appreciated, and supported, was still a hellhole for Roe. So this time, I decided to use my new social status for his advantage, because no matter how old I grew, I would never forget the things we faced as kids, and since I did not fear any sort of retaliation anymore, I decided that it was about time. Again, nobody deserves that, and to make up for not standing up for him in the past, I always intervened whenever anyone made fun of him, because when I was getting harassed, I had always wished I'd had someone. But Roe began to isolate himself from everyone else during our freshman year. I never saw him with friends anymore. He was always walking alone and getting the usual weird and judging looks in the corridors from people who were still too shallow to be mature. During this wonderful year of high school, I made sure that every time I saw him, I'd greet him in passing with a gentle, "Hey Roe, how are you?" and a small smile. It was a minuscule gesture, nothing over the top, but it can often go a long way. But the first one of these times I greeted him in high school, he seemed to flinch, and he just barely replied the pleasantries back, as if he had been expecting something different. One day in 10th grade, a group of 7 guys, my new friend Sonny being one of them, was following Roe across the backfield at lunch, shouting and calling him all sorts of humiliating names. I ran over to them and stopped them, while Roe continued to walk away. I felt my throat tear that day from the way I was shouting at Sonny and his other friends, letting them know that they should be ashamed of themselves, and to think about the look on Roe's face. What did they think they were playing at? I was fully expecting them to turn on me after I spoke, but no such reaction came. To my surprise, all 7 boys hung their heads in shame at what they'd done. I honestly couldn't believe it worked. That year, I had a lot of focus on my schoolwork. Roe was never a big part of my life, and we never interacted socially more than what I've just described. So I just went with the flow, trying to adjust to yet another year of high school. I guess that's why I felt like everything went by so fast. I had taken on an advanced English class, which I was passionate about, but took up more of my time. I felt as though I had adjusted well, and now that I knew people in the year above me, things never got boring in that class. It was always such a positive place, and I liked it specifically because every single person in that class was new to me. One day our teacher had taught us a lesson, and we had to reproduce a writing style, so it was a work period, where she let us talk, write, and edit each other's work. While we were doing so, the loudspeaker came on. The entire school heard the monotonous drone of the secretary listing the names of 15 students in my year. Roe was one of them. They were being told to head to the office immediately. Typical, I thought, rolling my eyes and shaking my head. The next morning, things were weird. I came into the school seeing slips of yellow paper in the hands of nearly all the students in the school. Throughout all the corridors, and more notably in my homeroom class, there were many looks of confusion, sidelong glances, and hushed, heavy murmuring. It wasn't long before my teacher pushed a yellow slip towards me with one hand. She gave me her usual smile and a pat on the shoulder. Usually our teachers will stand at the front when they teach, when they're ready to begin, and wait for us to get the hint to stop talking and listen. But instead of the familiar fading sound of giggles and speech into silence, the class was dead quiet. The teacher went on to explain that there had been a threat toward the school the day before, our school, and that we would only be spending half the day today. The yellow slip was a similar explanation to our parents. She did not go into more detail, and promptly ushered our attention into one of her fun and enjoyable activities and sent us off to write. But the whispers, the looks, and the mutterings continued. Then the boys I was sitting between turned to me seriously as one of them asked, "Hey, you went to that elementary with Ro, didn't you? Did you hear what happened?" A shadow of fear and apprehension cast itself over my face. The boys took turns speaking rapidly, nearly cutting one another off, telling me how Ro, from my elementary school, had brought a gun to school yesterday, and somehow the principal had been tipped off. One staff got to his locker and cut the lock and opened the slim, peeling blue door. There it was, the gun, but that's not all. It turns out that the list of boys and girls from my elementary school that had been read over the loudspeaker were all the names that were found on Ro's hit list, a piece of paper folded in half neatly and carefully placed under that large black pistol. I didn't speak a single word for a few minutes. Ro was a loner, and he was certainly unique, but I never thought he was capable of something like this, let alone bringing something like that to school. I actually felt bad for him in the weeks that followed. I could not help but think that there was also something going on with his home life too. Those suspicions were never confirmed, but it is something to think twice about the next time you feel like taunting someone. You don't know how people are already feeling, their experiences, what's in their heads. It may sound bad, but I'm glad I wasn't on that list. I never saw Ro again. He was expelled from the school. But that doesn't change the fact that something horrendous could have happened to a bunch of kids who were too vicious and arrogant to know any better, and now their actions may seem justified. I was the only person from our elementary school that was in that high school who wasn't on the paper. If I had acted like the others, pretended I didn't know who he was instead of giving him a smile, had I not stopped Sonny and his friends from torturing him, would my name have been on the list too? I don't know exactly what made Ro snap, but he was moments away from his plan, and would have put it into action too had the school staff not caught him. Friedrich Nietzsche is notorious for his saying, "When you look into the abyss also looks back into you." Don't harass or bully people. It can create a darkness in their minds, and it can come back to haunt you and everyone around you. 4. The Girl in the Apartment by Nick R. This is a story of when I was around 14 or 15. I would have been in the 9th grade or so. I was moving into a new city at the time. We were going into this old apartment. It was before I moved to California, which is where I live now. As we were walking in the lobby of this new building, something felt off immediately. I tried to ignore the feeling and continued on to the elevator once my parents got finished reserving our room. My mother pressed the elevator button, and the elevator arrived to where we were. I stepped in, and so did the rest of my family. The elevator went up, but as it was doing so, I could have sworn I saw a black figure just fall from the top of the building. The elevator was transparent in one part. When I turned my head to look completely, I didn't see anything. I decided to ignore the feeling, and once the elevator arrived on the top level, I stepped out with my family. It was an 8th-floor building, so the top floor was on the 8th floor. It wasn't a skyscraper, but it wasn't too short of a building either. I'd never really been this high up before, so as I looked out the window, the view kind of frightened me. We entered our apartment room and laid down our stuff to get settled in. This was one huge apartment space. It looked like a big family had once owned the apartment space. I only had 2 other siblings, so it didn't really make sense to me as to why we were given such a huge apartment space. There were 6 bedrooms, a kitchen, and 5 bathrooms. I thought to myself, this is one huge building for only 8 floors up. At around 11 p.m. that night, I was getting ready to go to bed. After all, the rest of my family was sound asleep already, and I was the only one still up on my phone. As I was about to shut off my phone, I started hearing soft crying coming from the kitchen, and it sounded like it was coming from a little girl. I thought it was just someone out in the hallway of the apartments, so I ignored it and tried to sleep. But here's where things get scary. The crying suddenly stopped, and I began to feel a little bit more relaxed. I decided to go out to the kitchen to get a drink of water and an apple. I walked out of my room, and as soon as I opened the fridge, I noticed a knife covered in red on the top rack of the fridge. I was shocked and confused. I shut the fridge door and ran out to the balcony to slow down my breathing. We had a beautiful view out there after all. The air was hot and humid, usually the kind of surroundings that help me to calm down. I sat out there for a while, and I managed to fall asleep there. That's when I had the dream. A dream of a little girl with curly brown hair standing in front of me, screaming, "Get out, get out, get out of here." Then she ran off. I heard loud breathing coming from beside me, which woke me up. When I was awake, from the corner of my eye, I saw her. She looked to be 11 or 12, and she had the same brown curly hair and pajamas from the dream, and she was standing against the railing of the balcony, breathing heavily. I turned around and she was gone. I thought I was going crazy at this point. I slowly got up and walked back inside. The minute I got back in, I heard a scream. I turned around and that girl was plummeting down the building to her end. I just checked to see if she was there and she hadn't been. I saw her fall. I ended up calling 911 and explained to them what happened. The ambulance showed up and they searched around, but there was no one there. They searched for hours, but nothing. My family was fined thanks to that, and then the ambulance took off. I went to the front desk the next morning and explained to them what had happened. One lady in particular told me that several years ago, an 11-year-old girl had jumped off the balcony due to cyberbullying and other family troubles. 5. The Little Boy by Zamantha. I was 13 at the time. It was a cold, rainy day in 8th grade. It was lunchtime, and being the antisocial kid I was, I decided to go to my English classroom and eat lunch there. The teacher didn't mind, so I would spend most of my time there anyway. As I was eating, my teacher said she had to go pick up a few papers from the printer, which was in another room, and that she'd be right back. Mouth full, I nodded and continued chewing down my lunch while scrolling through Instagram. As I ate, I suddenly heard a giggle coming from somewhere in the room. It sounded like a little boy. I ignored it, thinking that maybe it was coming from a different classroom. But that's when the lights began to go out. I assumed it was a power outage. It was storming after all. I stayed in my chair and just put down my sandwich, a little creeped out and hoping that the power would come back on soon. But then the giggling came back, and it sounded even closer, like it was coming from the desk next to mine. I was petrified. Not knowing what to do, I just sat there in fear. And that's when the teacher came in and turned the lights on, asking, "What are you doing?" She must have thought I turned the lights off. Apparently, the power didn't go out. I quickly got up, ran to the trash can and put my lunch in it, then walked away, telling her I was just finishing up. Later that day, 6th period came along, which was PE for me. We always had to dress out in the creepiest locker room. It was underground. There were no lights. The only way you could see is if it was bright out, so it was dark that day. While we were doing our daily game in the gym, the coach asked me if I could go down to the locker room and unlock the door with his key, as the locker rooms remain locked unless people are dressing out. She trusted me, which is why she always gave me the job to do it. As I was walking down, I began to hear someone crying. And again, it sounded like a male child. "Hello?" I said, but there was no response, just continued crying. When I made it down and unlocked the door to the locker room, I saw a small boy huddled in the corner. He was shaking and seemed to be crying. So the sound had been coming from him. "Are you okay?" I said, ignoring the strange fact that he was in a locked room. He didn't answer, but then he lifted up his head and stood up. I saw his mouth running with red fluid, and there was a gash on his head. When I saw this, lightning crackled through the window, and he was gone. I wanted to scream, but that's when I felt a hand on my shoulder. "What's wrong? It's just me." It was my friend Elizabeth. I didn't reply. There was nothing to reply. I was still petrified. I said it was nothing. Then I went back to the coach, gave her the key, and told her that the lockers were unlocked. I never did see that boy again, but I can't help but think, a school like that, what a horrible place to have your spirit left. Not only are kids our future, they're also our worst nightmares. There's something just extra creepy about a kid in a horrific situation. Imagine a guy running at you with a knife in the middle of the night. Now replace that guy with a small black-haired child. Why does that make it so much more creepy? Ugh. And this is why I won't be having kids. Good night. Be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Don't forget, you can send me your stories at darknessprevails.org. If you want to support my channel further, go to patreon.com/darknessprevails and donate any amount to get your name in the credits at the end of these videos. Or download my free app Spooked on the Google Play Store. If you've got extra cash, click the shop button below or go to morbidmonsters.com to get some really cool merchandise. Now then, here are my top 5 favorite comments from my previous full video about 10 creepy confessions from hunters. Cypher Brittain says 10 scary library stories or mansion stories. Those are actually extremely good recommendations. Nice. Writing that down to steal your idea, thank you. Destiny S says, "Here we go. Loved your stream yesterday too, man. You're pretty freaking cool. I would have done more already, actually, if it weren't for my sickness, which I don't know what it was, but now I feel better. And after this upcoming vacation, I'll be back to entertain." Julio Cantu says, "Will you be doing any collaborations with anyone anytime soon? Just asking. I'll be honest with you, no collaborations are coming up. I really don't like collaborating. You'd think it'd make the workload easier, but what it really does is make you wait on the other party, or you're the party being waited on. And even when the project is finished and uploaded, many fans aren't happy hearing anyone else. It doesn't really help your sub count that much either. For example, when I've helped smaller channels by collaborating with them, you'd think they'd get a lot of subs from me, right? No. Last time I did that, it maybe netted them 400 subs total. I mean, heck, I got a shout out on one of PewDiePie's live streams. I got 700 subs from that. So yeah, I'm going to be avoiding collaborations unless I just really want to, and at the moment I don't. I prefer to rely on me and myself alone. Fireshard2 says, I need merch, and I need you to buy my merch, so you better start saving up. And Regina Brown says, I have a scary story, but it's so horrible, I don't know if I should share it. Hey, it's all anonymous, my friend, if you want it to be. So go over there, send me that story, and disturb me forever. And that brings us to the end of our video. Thank you so much for tuning in today. More scary stories are coming soon. Here are the credits to my patrons who helped make it all possible. Until next time, this world is a strange one, so stay safe out there and stay creepy.